Technologies and Procedures Division of the Flight Standard Service. A little about myself. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. I flew F-18s in the Navy for 16 years, transitioned to commercial aviation, both cargo and passenger carriers, and joined the FAA in 2006. And I've been working UAS projects for the past 5 years. I think we'll start this off with some introductions, and hopefully I can get this right. We'll start with the panelists, and the first up is Eileen Lockhart from Excel Energy, and she'll take a few minutes to describe who she is, who she works for, and what program she's working on.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eileen Lockhart. I work for Excel Energy, and I am the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Program Manager for Excel. So I'm involved with all things unmanned. I've been part of the program since its inception, beginning in 2014, and have been working with the FAA for many years, and actually was the first partnership for safety participant at the FAA. And our focus has been enterprise-wide across our system, but specifically how to develop the transmission line inspection for energy infrastructure. So we've been focusing on 107 operations, leveraging unmanned aircraft systems for transmission line inspection. Happy to be here today. Thank you.
Next is Jennifer Player, and she's with BNSF.
Again, good morning. I'm Jennifer Player. I'm supporting BNSF Railway. So that's Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway. They are a freight transportation company operating 32,500 miles of track, mostly in the western United States. What's the interest in drones? Well, some portion of that track and the assets in and around it get inspected or monitored on a daily to weekly basis. And drones bring many benefits to that, including keeping people off the tracks, people and vehicles. Offering a way to inspect multiple tracks and assets at the same time, and also bringing, in combination with analytics and big data, the opportunity to bring a consistent, repeatable inspection process and even predictive. So keen interest in drones, especially BVLOS. I wear many different hats for that program. Been supporting since 2014 on the regulatory side. I do ConOps and ORA for waivers, exemptions, and the 2117B type cert process. On the engineering side, I provide tech eval and test from DAA through airframe platforms, and also serve as flight test director.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. And we have Joey Neptune from General Atomics.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Joey Neptune. I work at General Atomics, and we are a manufacturer of large UAS, and really what I do at GA is I work in the Civil Aerospace Integration Group, and that's a group dedicated to figuring out and working with industry, the FAA, about enabling commercial operations in the National Aerospace System and integration of large UAS into the airspace system. Really, GA's long-term commercial goal is routine, global, large-scale, global RPAS operations done with safety, efficiency, and security. And really what we are looking to do is not only have the National Airspace System accommodate what we're doing, but we really want to get to the point where we could assimilate into the National Airspace System. Really with the platforms that we operate, large UAS operating at all altitudes up to 40,000 feet, endurances up to 40 hours, we really are working and being in the airspace system more like a manned aircraft. And that being said, it is important that we are able to not only integrate effectively, but really meet the rules of the road, and those aren't always established for UAS. So really, all of the things that we are doing and really the capabilities of our platform, it really puts us in the beyond visual line of sight category exclusively. So there are a lot of interactions at play that we are very involved in, and we are very happy to be involved and help move the industry forward. So very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joey. Next, we have Captain Ken Varay from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office.
Good morning, everybody. I would say 40,000 feet is beyond visual line of sight. So.
Yes, it is.
My name is Ken Varay. I'm the commander of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department, and part of our air operations is our UAS division. We have indoor drones, mid-range drones, and long-range drones. And I'm here to speak on behalf of anybody who's looking for the public waivers in regards to beyond visual line of sight, which we managed to obtain in August of 2018. We use ours for offshore patrol. We have 47 miles of shoreline where we will fly the long-range drone for search and rescue or for support with the United States Coast Guard, as well as our visitor who comes here 6 months, POTUS, will fly offshore for security-based scenarios and reasons. So.
Thanks a lot, Ken. So those are our industry experts, and we think we've assembled a pretty diverse panel. Next up is John Page from the Air Traffic Organization. He's going to introduce himself, and then later on he's going to give us a little bit of a slide presentation. John?
Good morning. My name is John Page, and I'm with the Emerging Technologies team on the air traffic side of the FAA. In our office specifically, we are responsible for intaking, processing, and making an ultimate decision on 91-113 waivers for operations beyond visual line of sight. And I'll provide some more detail in my presentation on what that involves, but I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, John. And last but by no means least, we have, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have taken this slide down. We have Paul Albuquerque. He represents Flight Standards, and he works for me.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Albuquerque. I'm an aerospace engineer. I work in Tom's office within Flight Standards. We help with developing the policies and procedures for new technologies, so UAS specifically, whether it's UTM, remote ID, or beyond visual line of sight, such as DAA. We help with processing the waivers along with Flight Standard, AFS 800 in Flight Standards, and also work alongside Aircraft Cert to help develop the technical requirements for some of these technologies as they get more mature.
Paul is a busy man. There's no doubt about it. So I think right now we'll have John go ahead and give his air traffic presentation, and then Paul will follow him, and then we'll get right into the panelist questions.
There we go. Always good to know how to use the technology. So I'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here, talk a little bit about Part 91 operations, and specifically waivers to 91-113. This is, you often hear talk about Part 107. It's pretty popular these days, a lot of operations happening, but there are certain scenarios where you can't operate under Part 107. And so what I'm going to talk about are those particular scenarios and what you need to do to operate when you can't qualify under the rules of Part 107. Specifically under Part 91, you can operate as either a public operator or you can operate as a civil operator. If you're going to operate under a public operator certificate, then you have to provide a letter saying that you are a public operator, and you also have to do a self-declaration document for airworthiness, and then you have to obtain a certificate of authorization or waiver in order to operate. If you're going to operate as a civil aircraft, then you have to go through one of the other processes, and that's either Part 135 under the new authorization section 44807, and then you also have to get a COA issued in order to operate, and a COA is a certificate of authorization that's issued by the Air Traffic Organization. So a COA is required for all classes of airspace. Unlike under Part 107, where if you operate in Class G airspace uncontrolled, then you wouldn't need an authorization. But if you're operating under Part 91, you do require a COA for all classes of airspace. They're generally issued for 2 years, and they're not used in conjunction with a Part 107 operation. So if you're operating under 107, then you're solely under 107, not operating under Part 91. And a COA is not the same as a 91-113 waiver, which I'll talk specifically about in these next few slides. So 91-113 waiver. So the scope is that you're operating under Part 91 for one reason or another. You can operate as either public or civil. You need this anytime you're going to operate beyond visual line of sight of the pilot. So even if you're using visual observers, if the pilot doesn't have the aircraft in sight, then you'll need to apply for a 91-113 waiver if you are operating under Part 91. Some of the requirements include a CONOPS. In other words, you have to provide us information on how you're going to operate, where you're going to operate, what your mitigations are for operating beyond visual line of sight, what safety mitigations you have in place. And the way you provide that is you actually send that to us via email, and I'll provide you the email address here in a few slides. So when I introduced myself, I said that our office was responsible for intake, processing, and ultimately making a decision on whether to issue a waiver under 91-113. However, we don't do that alone. There's a lot of discussion within what we call the waiver group. It's led by our office, the Emerging Technologies team, but we have representatives from different air traffic organization offices, including our Air Traffic Services Division, our Airspace Services, which is part of the group that I'm in, our technical operations folks, which are frequency management and equipment people, security, our service centers, which are the ones who process our certificates of authorization, and also the impacted air traffic control facilities. Beyond the air traffic organization, we have aviation safety, and we have representatives from aircraft certification, from the UAS integration office, and also from flight standards. We also have our Office of General Counsel there to ensure that we abide by all the rules that we need to. And then we also have members from our National Air Traffic Controllers Association as part of the discussion so that everything is done up front. We make sure that all the information is obtained and everybody's working from the same page. So something that's important to understand is this work group doesn't prescribe or give a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. Everybody has a different type of operation, and that's why these are being looked at as one at a time, individual operations, and that's why you have to provide the information to us so that we can help you get to where you need to be. So, everybody has to have an eye chart, and here's mine. This is what the process looks like. So I'll tell you, it's a pretty complicated slide. It's pretty hard to read, especially from back there, I would imagine. So I'm going to give it to you in a more condensed version. How about that? So the first thing that has to happen, as I mentioned, you submit an email to this email address, 9-UAS-91113waivers@faa.gov. And it's a real simple email. All you have to do is tell us that you're interested in putting in an application for a 91-113 waiver. Once we receive that email, we will submit an email back to you and we will say, here's what you need to do. You need to provide us these particular documents. And those were the ones that I mentioned earlier with the CONOPS. Once we receive that, we'll set up a meeting with you and we will do it over the telephone, or you can come in person if you want to come visit us in Washington, D.C. You're welcome to do that. But we can do it over the phone and we will tell you exactly what the process is and help you understand what to expect. And also you can help us understand what you want to do at a basic level. So once we've gone through that and you've provided all the documents that we need, we will go to our second meeting and we will schedule that. And what will happen is you'll come in, or you'll do it over the phone or WebEx, and you'll do a presentation for our office and for all the other members of the work group that I mentioned. And in that presentation, you will present your concept of operations to us, and that will give the FAA folks some time to ask questions, also give you a time to provide input to us to help us better understand what you want to do. Once that meeting is complete, we go back to our offices and we submit all the documents to the FAA folks. They have 5 working days to review all your documents and provide questions back to our office that they may still have about your operation. Once those questions are consolidated, we take those and we send those over to you and allow you an opportunity to provide answers for the questions that they may still have. Once those questions are come into us, back to us, we provide those to the group. We do a complete review of your operation. And we start to look at it and see if there's anything that we need to ask you to change or adjust about your operation in order to allow it to move forward. Once we've done that, we kind of look at the operation and we say, have we done this before? For example, you may want to operate beyond visual line of sight with visual observers at 600 feet and below. So we look at all the operations that we've approved beyond visual line of sight, and we say, you know what, we've done that before, so we don't need to do an additional safety risk management panel on that particular operation. And then we can take that, we go into formal coordination with our air traffic control facilities, we get your documents signed off on, and then hopefully issue you an approval. If what you want to do is something that we haven't done before, then we would have to do an additional safety risk management panel to ensure that we're complying with the requirements that we have within the National Airspace System, and then we would go into the formal coordination process. And there will be an opportunity for questions, so Paul's going to come up and speak on his area.
Good morning, everyone. So I just put together a few slides to express the flight standards take on where we are right now and what we see for BVLOS. So the first thing is utilizing standards. I want to express that the FAA cannot independently solve BVLOS for industry and that the solution has to be done collaboratively. We seek to use industry standards as much as possible as the basis for BVLOS approvals, whether that's through the waiver process for 107 or for type certification projects going forward. Lastly, we see that consensus standards bodies such as RTCA, ASTM, and so on are an effective forum for industry regulators like myself, academia, and others to collaborate on developing the technology standards to help enable BVLOS. I put this slide together as an example of things to consider when transitioning from a visual line of sight operation to a beyond visual line of sight operation. So Part 107 was written as a visual line of sight rule and made a lot of assumptions and put a lot of responsibilities on the remote pilot. So I just highlighted some, just doing a read through top to bottom of Part 107, some areas that a beyond visual line of sight operator would have to reconsider when seeking a waiver. So things such as pilot certification. The qualifications for a remote pilot are on the assumption that it's a visual line of sight operation. So what are the things that a person seeking a beyond visual line of sight waiver would need to know in order to have a successful BVLOS operation? Then things like your operation shouldn't be a hazard and how you consider loss of control situations. How do you know what the position of your aircraft is, the velocity of your aircraft, and the other things stipulated in 107.31? How do you yield a right of way and remain well clear? That's generally the most popular thing that people consider anyway, and it's one of the hardest ones to find a way to comply with, but obviously that needs to be explained. Operations over people may be a factor depending on what your operation looks like. If you're operating in an area where it's where the land area is restricted access, then that might not be a factor. But if it is a factor, how would you ensure the safety of people on the ground? So I've provided some starting points on where people can look to figure out how to tackle these individual issues, but by no means is BVLOS a done deal. So we're here to help facilitate the answers, but we don't have all the answers, obviously. The last thing I'd like to go over is the way we see BVLOS conflict management. We like to break it up into strategic deconfliction and tactical deconfliction. So strategic are all the things that you can do ahead of time to structure your operation to minimize the likelihood of having an encounter with, say, manned traffic or even other unmanned traffic sometime in the future when that becomes more of an issue. And then tactical deconfliction as the ways of either doing see and avoid using visual observers or utilizing technologies such as DAA to, one, remain well clear, and two, to avoid collisions with other aircraft. That's all the slides that I had prepared. I wanted to leave a lot of room for Q&A, so I'm going to head back to my chair, but let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.
So it's back to the safe zone for Paul. So it's time for Q&A, and we thought the best way to address this was we have a couple of prepared questions for the panelists, so maybe spark some interest from the audience. We'll tee those up, and they're assigned to each individual. If you guys have, at the end of the 4 or 5 questions we asked the panelists, if you want to run to the mics, we have 3 mic runners out there, and engage for your own interest. You can engage individual panelists if we can figure out who the right panelist is to answer it, or they'll volunteer. So we'll see how this goes. So first up's Eileen. What is Xcel Energy doing to enable BVLOS UAS operations? That's kind of a simplistic question, but it is the big one.
So Xcel Energy has been doing a lot of development work around beyond line of sight operations. Last year, we did receive authority to fly beyond line of sight over transmission line outside of Denver. 50 miles with a transmission line that we could fly and test. And really, you know, we've done everything from aircraft development to airspace mitigation, leveraging a concept called infrastructure masking, where we're flying very close to the power lines, to develop the use case of improving our inspection method. So it's been a very complex process. We've had to put together a lot of, actually working with our partners, we've put together a lot of, I guess, strategic concepts, everything from operator qualifications to where we place the cameras to, you know, pre-route of our paths. So it's been, I'd say, a very long journey, but we're getting closer, and we hope that we can expand our operations to inspect our entire system, which consists of 8 states in the Midwest and about 24,000 miles of transmission line. So, done a lot.
Yeah, I would, if I could build on that a little bit, I think that this is not for the faint of heart. This takes an extensive commitment. It's, I mean, as remedial as learning who the FAA is and how they operate, how they think, and what their mission is. And when you combine that with a money-making effort, it's tough to get the gears to line up. There's a lot of grease involved there. So I really appreciate what these folks are trying to do. They're the innovators. They're the ones clearing the path for what's going to happen in the very near future. So I think she was very gentle with the FAA. There are some struggles for sure, no doubt about it. We'll give you another one since you did so well. Based on Xcel's experience, what are some of the tips for gaining approval to operate BVLOS? Again, it's kind of tips might mean, what did you learn about the FAA and what did you learn about the process, and what could we do better?
How much time do we have?
That clock says 0.
Okay, let's see, some tips. Well, you know, one thing that comes to mind is you have to be an artist in writing. We've had to, you know, our first application was 800 pages long. So it took a lot of writing and trying to figure out how to clearly define our concept of operations, all of the technology that we're trying to leverage, pretty much going through a certification process without actually certifying the technologies, and being able to describe that to someone that's at the FAA who's not necessarily out there in operations is a tough job. It's not easy to do. You know, having frequent communication with the FAA, learning who to speak with, I'd say is a big struggle that folks have. You have to really kind of find your person, find your champion, and explain to them what it is that you're doing, your intent of your operations, going through, you know, the public good. Why are we worthy of these operations? And really going through that process and telling or educating the FAA about, you know, how this is going to benefit not just Xcel Energy, but the country in general. Notifications of our customers, you know, this is new stuff for us anyway, and so we had to learn how to interact with our customers, make them somewhat comfortable with these operations. I would say that that was a big step with our approval that we received. And then just a lot of technical tweaks. You know, you would think that, you know, one UAS, one drone fits all. No, we had to go through a full RFP, RFI process to figure out which one was going to be our aircraft, and we're still not settled on our final aircraft. So just that in itself was a big challenge. So I would say, you know, do your homework, figure out what kind of aircraft you want, why, the duration, and how that meets your business need, and the safety is key to success. So.
And talk to the FAA early and often. I probably just made a lot of enemies. Jen, how's BNSF meeting the beyond visual line of sight kind of need?
So the partnership between BNSF Railway and the FAA goes back to 2015 with the Pathfinder Focus Area 3, focus on beyond visual line of sight. And since that, the first beyond visual line of sight, no chase, no visual observers flight, long-range flight that BNSF conducted was back in November of 2016. And since that time, it's been a weekly operation of several hundred miles and up to 4 to 6 hours per flight throughout 2017 and into 2018. And in that time, we've amassed over 700 hours of BVLOS operations, over 26,000 miles cumulatively of those operations. So lots of lessons learned in that time frame. How we're getting there is a combination of a lot of things. Eileen touched on our journey as well, similar experience across the board in the operations and developing those, the technologies, developing those, making sure everything fits together. We're getting there through sort of a layered approach in terms of the safety mitigations, right? Because it's all about safety. That's what the FAA wants. We're going to go out there, we're going to do a mission that's for the public good. We're going to protect critical infrastructure, make sure those trains are running on time, protecting communities. But at the same time, we have to protect the national airspace. And so we've got to bring all of that focus together. It really helps in our program that we have a safety focus. Everyone on the program's got an aviation background and an aviation mindset. So that helps us operate with the FAA and in the NAS and do so safely. There isn't a technology silver bullet out there yet that just you can buy and put in place and have everything just work. So there's a lot of work involved. It's a very high bar. Eileen mentioned all the documentation, the safety case work. We've done all that as well. And so I come back to this layers of safety mitigations because there isn't a one size fits all, right? You have to seek out the operational, that strategic and tactical that Paul mentioned. You have to build those layers up relative to your use case. So for our example, it's rural Class G because the majority of the tracks are sort of in rural Class G airspace. And we will slowly migrate, crawl, walk, run towards other classes of airspace and more population density over time as these safety mitigations are proven out. So an airworthy airplane, operations in rural Class G, airspace awareness systems in place for non-cooperative and cooperative aircraft as we move towards more and more of a certified DAA solution, keeping people flying over tracks where there are not people other than participants. All those things come together and make for a good safety case.
You know, I had another question for her, but she took it and ran with it. It was a lessons learned type of thing. Jen's been doing this for a while. She has a kind of a pilot background, and not a kind of a pilot background, most definitely a pilot background. Gets that side of it, understands the FAA, certainly shares the level of frustration. I think that some of the things that, you know, when you're new and innovative, it's not always smooth and quick, but I think that these partners up here have the big picture and know where we're going to be very soon. Joey. This is a long one, Joey.
All right.
Stay with me. What are some of the areas where General Atomics has been involved in making the future BVLOS operations a reality? So kind of, where are you and where you plan on going?
Sure. No, that's a great question. That really is the million-dollar question. Like I mentioned before, really GA falls squarely in the operating area of BVLOS. And really when it comes to taking steps towards making a future of large-scale BVLOS operations a reality, it really does start at not only the operational standard, but also going all the way back to the industry consensus standards that are in place that will allow those operations to occur. So we at GA, and myself personally, we've been involved in SC228, Detect and Avoid, Working Group 1 and Working Group 2 on the command and control aspects of it. And it really is important for industry to get involved really from the ground level to be able to have those insights and say what does need to be put in place for these operations to eventually be approved. Then on more of the operational side of things, there are numerous things that GA really has been doing. I'm going to hone in on two of them that we've done. We have partnered with NASA last year to do a no-chase core flight in the National Airspace System. Really in June of 2018, we received the first ever operational approval to use an SC228 DO 365 developed detect and avoid system as an alternate means of compliance to the see and avoid requirements, where we did a flight without a chase plane that took off from Los Angeles, transited up the coast of California through the Oakland area, and then came back to Los Angeles and landed. And also in there was some terminal area operations and a low pass at a Class D airport. So really that flight was done completely beyond visual line of sight in a dynamic environment where we were expected to comply with air traffic control procedures, heading changes, being able to deconflict with other traffic, should it be seen or should it be encountered. And it was really not done in a manner that was not scripted at all. And really going into that, to do something like that where you are covering thousands of miles, having a flight that's multiple hours long, there really are a great deal of safety work that needs to be put in place, and that was done to enable that to happen. And like I said, we partnered with both NASA and the FAA on allowing that to happen. What was presented earlier about how you receive a 91-113 waiver, that was the exact process that we did go through. Submission of a ConOps, having a safety review panel that was done. I got to sit in the room as 25 experts from the FAA came and spent 2 days at the NASA facilities looking at each hazard line by line and saying, what is the hazard that's really associated with removing the chase plane, and how can this be done safely? In addition, putting things in tactically and strategically in place such that you mitigate hazards. So we had things such as flight above the minimum vector altitude to make sure that you're always within radar coverage. Other things that we did was making sure that you had redundant data links in the areas where non-cooperative traffic could reasonably be encountered under 10,000 feet. So really what we had to do was showcase that really the flight could be done, and not only be done, but also be done with safety and efficiency. And that's not only from a technology standpoint, but also from a human-in-the-loop standpoint, because even though we are obviously developing technology that allows us to do many different things that we were not able to do in the past, there still is the human element of it. You're interacting with other people in the airspace where there are people on board. You're working with air traffic controllers, and you have communication requirements such that they could give you course changes, heading changes, altitude holds, and such, and you really are expected to comply to anything that they need you to. So the training on that side of the fence to allow the operation to occur was important as well. And then really this flight was a success, and we really are looking to parlay that into some future opportunities that we are doing. We've partnered again with NASA on the SIO program, which is taking additional technologies, specifically Detect and Avoid and CNPC, for certified data links to allow low latency communications in terminal areas and operations to occur in more urban areas. And really all of this being done on a commercializable platform and showcasing a commercializable mission. because that really is the end goal of it. Like you said, like was mentioned earlier, getting the two things to line up is very key. Not only the technology side of things and the science side of things, but also the business side of things. And really, SIO is working to kind of bridge the gap between those two different things. And there really is a big onus on things and technologies being on a path to certification, because certification really is the key thing to make sure that safety is accounted for and the integrity of the airspace system is maintained.
Wow. Okay, so this question here hits myself and Paul. It's very near and dear to us. We're going to beat this drum for a long time. I'm going to give it to you, Joey. It's what role do you see industry playing in the development of technical standards going forward? It's a big one, industry.
Industry. I think anyone from industry here, we kind of have ulterior motives about getting these things able to have standards developed so that we can go out and do the operations that we want to do. We have skin in the game, and it really does make sense for us to be involved on the ground level, such that things that are implemented, the standards that are implemented, are achievable by industry. I've heard it said before, from the FAA perspective or a safety perspective, really the safest air traffic system would be a system where there are no users. However, that doesn't work for industry, that doesn't work for the FAA, and it doesn't work for the population in general. So striking a good balance between safety and allowing operations to occur that are safe really is key, and industry will really bring the expertise to say, these are the technologies that we have on our roadmap, these are the technologies that we're interested in developing, and now you have a dialogue and a communication with the FAA that says, well, what do you think about these things, and what are the implications associated with using this technology or applying this technology? And the FAA gets to be able to set thresholds, set minimum operational requirements, and it's really a very big back and forth. I know all of us would like to be at the point where we could just pick up a standard and say, oh, this is exactly what needs to be done. But the truth of the matter is, we are on the precipice of a new industry, and there's a lot of things that are changing, and a great deal of technology and innovation that's being done, and those standards, they really aren't done, and they aren't developed as of yet, because of all the emerging technologies that are coming out with UAS as a whole. So there are multiple different standardization bodies, organizations, RTCA, ASTM, ISO, all of these are different ones where there's great work being done specifically in the area of beyond visual line of sight, detect and avoid, test methods, design and construct standards, C2, data links, loss link procedures, operations over people. And really, I look around this room here, and there are industry experts from all of those different areas seated in this room right now. And I think to get these standards on a path to them being able to be approved and accepted by the FAA, it really will go much faster if we all kind of understand that us working together will get us to the end point quicker, which will allow us to get our operations approved all the faster. So I would definitely implore anyone who does have an interest in these type of things or does have something they could bring to the table, definitely don't wait for the standards to come out and be developed on their own without your input into it. It really, the thing that could be needed to get it over the hump really could be your expertise and your input. And it's really interesting to see the collaboration that happens really between not only the FAA and industry, but different industry partners who have competing interests, and figuring out a way for everyone to walk away from the table happy with a solution that allows everyone to take a step forward towards the ultimate goal that everyone has of enabling large-scale operations.
Completely agree.
Thank you, sir. And I cannot beat that drum enough. For us, the FAA, to operate without a standard slows us down quite a bit. And so we need you, the experts and the innovators, to step up and help us with that. Last but by no means least, we got the sheriff. Ken, I think I know the answer because I think John Page did a really good job of briefing this thing, but we'll tee it up anyway. What steps were needed for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office to secure permission to operate beyond visual line of sight. By the way, this is probably the most useful thing we're doing right now. I mean, if we can support our law enforcement using something that's not going to hurt an officer, this is what we ought to be doing. So how was the process, and tell us a
Yeah,
little bit.
so ours is for public operations. So we started ours back in 2015, and it's not even a walk to run, it is a crawl to get to where you're going. Back then, we had to first start off with a training COA. It's no longer required. We then ended up getting a blanket COA for anything in Class G airspace. This is for mid-range and long-range drones. Then from the blanket COA, and we showed our training, we were able to get our operational COA, which allowed for extended visual line of sight, which is what I recommend for anybody who is in the public sector trying to do that. Extended visual line of sight will allow you first to be able to have like a visual observer watch the drone instead of that of the pilot in command. It helps you out greatly for it. And then that puts you into the next steps for getting beyond visual line of sight. And all the panelists have already said this. You got to know what your mission is. You got to know the area that you're going to be flying in. For us, most of ours is over the Atlantic Ocean, so that makes things a little bit easier. If I put that thing inland, it's going to be harder for us to even get that waiver. The other part about it is the type of airframe. Most airframes that you're getting out there nowadays are usually battery operated and last about an hour. Most of everything for the smaller drones like Chula Vista that they use, they've got about 30-35 minute flight time. What's beyond visual line of sight going to help you with a drone that only flies 30 minutes? It's not going to help you out much. So are you able to get that into an area and effectively use a large enough drone to have beyond visual line of sight? After we used our chase vessels, whether it's a boat or a plane, to watch our drone out there and be able to get back to and communicate with the FAA and explain to them exactly our mission. We provided our CONOPS, everything else that was able to be provided to them to show beyond visual line of sight for the safety of not only the airframe that we're flying, but everybody else that's in the airspace. They managed to go ahead and give us the waiver. So it did take a lot of steps. It will take a lot of time and effort on your end, but as long as you have open communication, you have a plan, you know exactly what you're doing, and you provide them with your concept of operations, you're not going to have any problems with the FAA.
Nice. No problems with the FAA. So I think I'm taking a look at the clock here, and I'd like to get some questions from the audience. We have some runners out there, and I can't see anybody. So if we have any questions for the panelists, please raise your hand. We have other prepared questions. Runner, I think I see one out there.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Name is Nick Olmsted. I'm with Kilroy Aviation. I want to follow up on something that Mr. Neptune said, and I'm going to paraphrase you. You mentioned that commercialization will require certification. And essentially certification, and I noticed there's no FAA aircraft certification reps on this panel. So for the FAA, the comment I have here in the question is that there's a perception that all you need to fly a UAV is a waiver and go. But I would suggest that that perception is harming the end state of operators that need manufacturers to provide a certification on larger UAVs, ones that will fly beyond visual line of sight and do more interesting commercialization tasks. So for the FAA reps, can you address the perception that just a waiver is all that's needed to fly these larger, more interesting aircraft?
I can certainly touch on it a little bit. I know that, and I'm from the Air Traffic Organization, so generally certification is not an area that we get into, obviously. But I know that there are several other panels that are occurring today and tomorrow and Wednesday that are going to address certification issues specifically. I think they have some announcements that are going to be made that are pretty significant. And obviously that's not my area to delve into, so I won't go any further than that. But I do agree that, you know, as we progress, Those are things that are going to have to be factored in and considered. And if you look at the IPP program, much of that is focused on the certification of those aircraft as they progress through their crawl, walk, run stages, and they begin to operate in those crawl stages where they're operating, line of sight under Part 107, and then they get a little further along and they go BVLOS, and then they under 107, and then they get into their 135 certification or their technical certification, and then they start to operate under Part 91, where they come in for the 91-113 waivers. So it is an issue certainly that we're aware of, and I think during the symposium over the next couple days, you'll certainly see that discussion start to occur, because the goal is that we have to establish regulations and standards in order to allow that innovation. And it also goes the other way. We have to see the innovation in order to get to the regulations and standards that we need to get to. And so it's that partnership between government and industry, I think, that really has to happen to help that.
That was nicely handled. I think that we could have 100 panelists up here, experts up here, and answer all the questions, but it's a symposium, and there's a lot of breakout sessions to address each individual thing, just like John said. So if we could scope it to the BVLOS and detect and avoid high-level stuff, that's what we're prepared to do. It's not intentional that aircraft, they're probably in the room. It's not intentional that we left them off, but there's another panel that's going to handle that. Another question?
Hi, my name is Martin Palmas. I represent the U.S. Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association. We have about 10,000 members around the U.S. and excuse me. We fly regularly in Class E or in Class E and other airspace, flies hundreds of miles. And so my question is specifically about the technology that's being developed for detect and avoid, and whether or not that's including the capabilities of detecting manned ultralights without a fuselage. And if so, what are some of those considerations?
So that's a great question, but it falls into kind of the same bucket as the last gentleman. We do have, when's the DAA?
Later today.
Later today, there's specifically a DAA breakout panel. We could say a few words about that, but it's going to be directly focused on that.
Good morning. Rose Mooney from Archangel Aero. So there have been a number of 333s which were for beyond visual line of sight, and now we're moving to 44807. How's the agency handling that transition? Are those 333s being considered now for 44807s, or are you going to address the 333s?
So I know it is being looked at. It's not as far as the transition of if they have a 91-113 waiver, then we would transition it from one to the other. I can't really address the exemption piece of it because that's our rulemaking office, and they're the ones who do that transition from one to the other. I think the way they're allowing it to occur, though, is to let them transition out, because the majority of the 333s are beginning to expire. So I think that's how they're transitioning that, but we could certainly get confirmation for you and get back with you.
Good questions, but we have some pretty valuable panelists up here. If we could kind of maybe direct some questions and lessons they've learned, so that we don't get to reinvent the wheel. So, anybody have a question for the panelists?
Good morning. Yeah, here. Good morning, Nicolas Marcoux from the DGAC French CAA. We've also authorized long-range operations for railways or electrical line surveillance. And we have questions. I have a question regarding the air risk mitigation. In France, we implement a temporary restricted areas around the structure or the facilities we want to inspect. And I was wondering if there is the same kind of mitigation that is provided each time you want to perform a surveillance of railways or electrical lines, or if you authorized not to having such restrictions because you fly close enough close enough of the facilities you want to inspect.
So I'm not sure that I understood your question, but for Xcel Energy, we fly extremely close to the lines so that the airspace is very, very safe, and we use lots of different electronic means and technology to also clear the airspace for surveillance of cooperative and non-cooperative aircraft. And we believe that this approach that we're using is transferable for all linear infrastructure in Class G rural areas, but it's unclear if this is applicable for more urban type settings. I'm not sure if I understood your question, but that's kind of our approach. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, what we do actually is that we implement temporary restricted areas along the lines that prevent other aircraft from entering this airspace.
Oh, yeah. No.
Segregated airspace.
So they just file for TS.
Segregated airspace, yes.
Yeah, no, so we file NOTAMs and we alert all of the operators in the area, but no, we don't have a way to segregate the airspace and operate for our operations currently.
Yeah. Same thing with the railway inspection. It's 400 feet and below, but it's not segregated. We're responsible to remain well clear and not collide with other air traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for GA's operations as well, looking at critical infrastructure monitoring, it is on us to ensure that we do have the capabilities to see and avoid other aircrafts while we're operating in the vicinity over those critical infrastructure items.
And for the Sheriff's Office, we actually use an AD system, airspace awareness detection. It's basically the radar they use by the air traffic controller. It actually will help detect any of those hang gliders that you see around there because we've detected them before. And it's up to our pilots to make sure that we keep away from anything that's within our area or in our little bubble that we built around there. We can file for an emergency COA because we're a public entity, be able to create a larger bubble around us to have air traffic fly from our area where we're at.
Does that help? We just kind of, we're not in the segregated airspace business right now. It's full integration.
So, I had one here. As Marcus Johnson from NASA. Quick question for the folks from industry on this panel. From the applications that you guys have been exercising in the field, can you comment a little bit on any lessons learned that you've had, useful mitigations that you've had that could be extendable to operations over people, that could be extendable to multiple vehicle operations, or at least operating around other UAs in the airspace, and how you've taken those lessons learned or plan to take those lessons learned to expand industry's knowledge and utility of those type of mitigations or approaches going forward.
I could start. Sure. Yeah, lessons learned really are the biggest thing that comes out of all of these different demonstrations that we do and these operations that we do in the national airspace. So specifically for some of the ones that GA has been participating in, one of the big mitigations that we put in place that we didn't think about at the beginning until we started getting some more flight planners and getting air traffic controllers involved with the planning as well, was ensuring that if you are going to be doing a flight, let's say, that is the national airspace system, that stays off of, as much as possible, say like public airways or the transit routes in the sky, to make sure that you're not causing unneeded disruption or unneeded interactions to be happening between different users of the airspace system. And if you could have your routes be a little bit offset of the where most of the traffic is going, that was a big thing that we learned, and that was some good feedback that we got from bringing in air traffic controllers, because they didn't want to have to continually let everyone know that we were going to be operating. And if we are getting to the point where it is going to be routine, we want to make sure that we're not causing undue interruptions. Other things that we did learn and we kind of figured out as we were doing some of our flights is that if you can minimize the unnecessary and the undue hazards that you are opening yourself up to, that's really better. That's a better thing to do than not doing it. For instance, really in getting back to the skydiver question, one big thing that we had and one big consideration that we had on the No Chase Core was what would happen if we did run into, say, a skydiver or a ultralight that would happen to be in the area. And I am happy to say that the radars that are equipped and specified in DO 366, they do go down to looking at cross sections that are that small, so you can be able to pick them up and receive detect and avoid clearance to stay away from them. However, on the SIO demonstration that we're doing, and we're looking at the capabilities of what we are actually able to do and critical infrastructure monitoring and surveillance, if you could stay out of the more hotly contested airspace, go ahead and do it if it doesn't buy you anything to be down at that point. And I think that was a big thing that we did learn is if there's no reason to make things more difficult than they need to be. Sometimes we want to just say, we just want to have unrestricted access to the airspace, and we want to be able to fly wherever we want, whenever we want, on whatever mission we want to do. However, if you could scope your missions and your requests such that you really are getting the most bang for your buck for what you actually are requesting, then it's much easier for the FAA and their approvers and the air traffic organizations to give you what you need based on what the actual full requirements of your, say, operation are going to be, and not just a open-ended, we want to be able to operate everywhere. So I think a big thing that we have done and learned is scoping, bounding things such that it can be done in a manner that really facilitates approvals.
Okay, we've got 8 minutes left. It's time for a couple of questions. I've got a hand and a runner.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Muka. This question is mostly for the non-FAA folks up there. So I know that with these operations you're gathering lots and lots of data, but in your dealings with the FAA, which data do you find is in the highest demand that the FAA is asking for, and which helps you build your safety case the most? That's what I'd like to know.
Cooperative and non-cooperative air traffic is a big one for us. How many planes do you see? Can you see them? Can you verify that you see them? Can you prove and verify that you saw them? Prove it again. That's a big one.
Yeah, I'd reiterate that. I mean, there's an avalanche of data available from our operations because we were operating, or we continue to operate so frequently and over such long distances and many hours a day. So from the aircraft side of the operational and the aircraft side, there's a volume of data. But I think really the interesting thing for BVLOS, right, is what is that encounter rate where we're flying, and where we differ than Joey and GA is the below 400 foot question mark. What air traffic is really down there, and that's an open question. We don't really have good numbers on it. So everything we're doing feeds that question.
Lost link is another one. I would say it's a big one.
Yeah, I think another big one is pilot response times for detect and avoid maneuvers and being able to remain well clear. TCAS resolution advisories and being able to actually go ahead and make required movements. And then another big thing that we really did have to hit on is how can you deterministically prove that your system will work all the time and give predictable results. And when getting into like the software assurance and saying what testing can be done, what are the requirements that drive the actual tangible deterministic outcomes, that was another big one that we've had to focus heavily on.
Yeah, so aircraft reliability and then air traffic characterization, airspace characterization.
My name is Reggie. My question is for Jennifer and Eileen. What % of your critical infrastructure is currently being inspected with drones, and what's the rate at which you're going to scale?
For us, it's less than 10% of our system is currently being inspected with drones, and we want to scale it enterprise-wide. So we have full intention of leveraging the technology not just for transmission line inspection, but for all of our infrastructure inspection. So we're hoping to partner with the FAA to get us there, starting with the transmission line. How about you?
I think we have COAs for about 3,000 miles right now. Not all the infrastructure to support the actual flying is stood up on all those areas. But clearly the goal is an enterprise-wide capability, similarly to Excel. And that's the long-term goal.
Yep.
So there's no doubt that these folks are doing the heavy lift for us now. Hopefully it gets a little bit easier in the future as we develop standards, introduce new technologies. It's the first to the table always has the toughest and most expensive job. So I can't overemphasize what they're doing and partnering with us and where we're trying to go. Anybody else?
Hello, my name's Dawn Veach. I'm the airport manager at Salisbury Regional Airport. I'd like to back up to two previous comments that Joey Neptune was making regarding a concise package being sent to the FAA and that discussion. We have a 8,000 square foot drone innovation center under construction with the potential for 60,000 square foot of manufacturing facilities being built. We've been working with the correct offices, and our response back from Raymond Z and our airport district office yesterday for asking to install drone detection equipment, not for countermeasures, but for additional beyond line of sight coverage with our GPS system to connect a corridor from our airport to restricted airspace where these aircraft would operate. That response today said that we have to have a meeting, and I'm hoping there's somebody here that I can have that meeting with today. I think that we have an airport operations manual. We gave you our operational concepts. We have a company with 15 years of experience at Wallops Island. We have everything met, and I can't seem to get an answer yet. There was a gentleman in the FAA that told our county council that we would not be able to install any kind of detection equipment back in March. And I'm just trying to get clarification on whether I can move forward because from what I'm hearing here, it seems like we should be able to do all those things yet. I got an email today saying, nope, stand by, we got to have all these meetings and discussions. So is there some clarification on the discussion part, and may I meet with someone here during this week? Thank you.
So I would say you're talking about a couple different subjects there, and so what we'll probably have to do is have that discussion to clarify what you want to do, because when you talk about counter drone or drone detection capabilities, that kind of goes to one area, but when you're talking about operating beyond visual line of sight in a corridor type of situation, that goes to another. So certainly we can sit down and talk about that and figure out what direction you need to go and who you specifically need to be talking to, because if you're focused on operating beyond visual line of sight from one location to another, depending on whether you're operating under Part 91, which would be our office, or if you're operating under Part 107, then it would be the flight standards folks. So we can certainly connect you with the right people. And then the airports folks would be involved in that, obviously, because of the discussion about installing the equipment at the airport. And I believe there's also a discussion, I think it's later today, on airport detection equipment. So I think all the folks are certainly here, and we can have that conversation.
Thanks, John. We have time for one more. I got a hand over there. I need a microphone.
There's a microphone that way.
There's one.
What a microphone here. We can do two questions. Hey, can I ask a question? Hey, my name is Mike. I'm the CEO of Drone Deployed. I've got a question for the commercial panelists. First up, thanks so much for the hard work you've been putting in over the last 3 years, leading the way, getting this proven out. I wanted to ask how your programs, Eileen and Jennifer, were adapting to what you'd learned from the FAA, what you'd learned operationally. Some specifics. Are you guys going higher altitude or lower altitude? Are you flying bigger drones or smaller? How are things changing with all the things you've learned running your BVLOS programs?
Go first. So I guess it changes depending on the use case. So we haven't found a one-size-fit-all solution yet, right? So we're We've explored large UAS, we've explored small UAS, and we've explored everything in between. And we haven't quite figured out what our standard operation, standard procedure is going to be in terms of all the different use cases that we have. So I guess it just sort of depends on what it is that we're trying to accomplish. But that's a tough question, actually. I mean.
Elizabeth, can we do one more?
Well, hello, my name is André Arruda. I'm from AL Drones company in Brazil, and we're a specialized company in certification of drones, professional drones for BVLOS mainly. I have a question that's more directly related to the FAA people over there. Now, we just finished in Brazil the first BVLOS approval certification, and it's restricted to non-urban areas or crops and green areas mainly. And now we are trying to extend, working at ANAC, which is our aeronautical authority, to increase or to extend that approval to populated areas as well. And I would like to understand how is FAA addressing not only BVLOS for green areas and farms, but also BVLOS over populated areas or over dense cities. How is that being addressed for the near future?
I would say that as we transition from rural to more urban areas, we're definitely going to lean more heavily on industry members like these guys working on standards development for, figuring out what the right performance requirements are. So there's many different components, right, as you get away from rural areas into more urban areas. So the ground risks change, the air risks change. You might be interacting with ATC. So there's a lot of different considerations, and we're definitely looking for the standards to help flesh out, what are the things you need to consider, and also what are the technologies that you can utilize to meet those challenges.
I would also add that depending on what part you're operating under within the U.S., those requirements vary. So under Part 107, on our small UAS rule, there was, as the Secretary spoke about, and also our Administrator, there was a rulemaking action that was put out in February, I believe it was, that talked about operations over people under the small UAS rule and seeking comment on that. That comment period just ended, but I think you can still get that and see that and what those requirements are.
Okay, folks, I'm getting the big red flags. So thanks for the participation. I really want to thank the panelists, Eileen, Jennifer, Joey, Ken, and our air traffic folks. I pay Paul, so he's good. Thanks. It's tough going first. These folks do this for nothing. They're true partners, and I can't thank them enough. We can't do this without you folks, all you folks out here and these panelists up here. So thanks a lot.
If you ever find yourself lost in the dark and you can't see, I'll be the light to guide you. Find out what we're made of when we are called to help our friends.